Right. Well, hi, everyone, and thanks for joining. We're going to get going here. We've had a few of these webinars, and I see a few regulars that keep coming back to hear our story, and a few new names as well. So welcome to everyone, and look forward to just sharing an update from our Q4 activities last year, where we did have a lot of news coming out. And in our last webinar, we spoke in detail about the Goldfields PEA. We're not going to do that. We'll recap on that this time, but focus a little more on our uranium results. If you do have a question, please just drop it into the chat box. You should find that on your Zoom interface, and we'll get those answered for you after the webinar. So I've got about 16 or so slides, and expect to go through this in around 20 minutes. So thanks for your time. So we'll be making forward-looking statements. If you do want to see those in further detail, please do refer to our website or our corporate presentation. So just to recap on our assets, we still focused in northern Saskatchewan with our Goldfields gold project, where we are advancing potential for Saskatchewan's next gold mine. And of course, the most recent development there was that the completion of a preliminary economic assessment, and results were released in early November last year. A lot of news coming out of the company toward the end of last year were the analytical results or assay results from our uranium projects, where we had done some initial pass of drilling in summer 2022, and we were very pleased with those results. We also had a news release in January from analytical results from a prospecting work we did at Murmac, which was completed in October, and we got those assay results sort of over December, early January, and reported them last month. So that's also some news. There's some exciting things we found in the field there. In Mexico, we still have our Exutan project, fantastic setting. We're not advancing that at the moment, but is a pipeline asset or something we could look to spin out in future. So just going back to the PEA, these are just the sensitivities we put out. And I think most notably, since we released that PEA, the gold price has moved up significantly, and I'm sure a lot of you are aware of that. When we completed the PEA, we used a gold price of $1,650 an ounce. That was in line with peers, in line with a lot of other studies that were done last year. And the base case produced some robust economics, but we're in a very good position a few months later here, where the gold price has moved up from around those 1,650, 1,700 levels to closer to our upside case, which is at 1950. And there, Goldfields would look to produce a after-tax NPV of 460 million Canadian dollars, after-tax IRR of just over 50%, and a 1.3-year payback. Those are very attractive, robust economics, and clearly show in this environment the project warrants advancement. Certainly, sentiment in the gold market is very bullish. We've seen a number of indicators, both fundamentals and technicals, that show gold price could continue to improve this year and break through the $2,000 level. So having this PEA done is excellent for the company, puts us in a really good position. What's also important about the PEA is the costs that were estimated for that. Our PEA wrapped up end of October and incorporated all those recent inflationary increases that we'd seen over 2021, 2022, particularly around fuel, labor, steel, things of that nature. And what I've read recently is a lot of the producers have said that the inflationary increases really peaked out in sort of early Q4 last year, and they've actually seen prices sort of level out, or in some cases actually taper off more recently. So we've already baked in all these higher costs associated with this environment, but still producing exceptionally robust economics, and obviously at a time when the gold price looks to be strengthening. Just to recap on some of the highlights there, it's an 8.3-year mine life, a 3-to-1 strip ratio. That's an exceptionally good strip ratio for a gold project. I haven't seen a better strip ratio across any of the Canadian open pit gold projects. Really nice production profile, averaging around 100,000 ounces per annum. That's a really nice number for a small or mid-tier producer to add to their production profile. All-in sustaining costs, $889 an ounce. That's very competitive and comparable to other open pit projects. And that capex, a very nice low entry cost at 234 million Canadian dollars, and that includes a contingency of $34 million. So just to benchmark where your project's at, Fortune Bay has a very attractive valuation where it sits at the moment, and hasn't got the recognition yet from the market. We've certainly not alone. We see a lot of gold juniors like ourselves with development assets trading at huge discounts. Despite the high gold price, we've seen some of the producers, certainly their share price starting to improve, but certainly an attractive buying proposition. And I believe particularly in Fortune Bay, where we are valued at the moment. In terms of our grade and production, our grade compared to all these other Canadian open pit gold projects with studies in 2022, grade is very competitive for an open pit project. And remembering also, we've got that really favorable strip ratio to accompany our competitive open pit grades. Initial capital costs, as I mentioned, a really attractive entry point at 234 million, and certainly very competitive compared to other projects. And the economics, sitting with one of the better IRRs amongst all the other projects out there, and decent NPV to accompany that. Obviously, it's not a huge project, but we do believe there's scope to expand that and build on the resource base. So just turning to some of those opportunities. Exploration potential, we showed during our phase 1 drilling at Box that the deposit is still open, it keeps going at depth, and we are finding some nice high grades. Just some of those highlighted grades listed there, around the 8 up to 13 gram a ton, so over widths that would definitely support open pit mining. That drill spacing from phase 1 was very coarse. It's 50 to 75 meters. There's not enough drilling there to show continuity of those high grades yet. So additional work is warranted where we believe we can add ounces from an underground potential. There's also numerous other prospects on the project which are shallow, things like Frontier Lake, Golden Pond. They're underexplored. There are promising grades that have been picked up historically. So further works needed there to understand those deposits geologically, and then commence with some drilling, all with a view of adding resources to the project. Gold recovery side, there's potential to improve those gold recoveries. The estimates in the PEA are somewhat conservative, but we do need some more data, particularly variability data across the grade range to look at ways we could improve the gold recovery. Ore sorting, we did some desktop work with SRK during the early stages of the PEA. It wasn't advanced enough to incorporate in the PEA, but it did show potential to improve project economics. So as we work toward a PFS, we are looking at incorporating some studies around that, as we do believe it has potential, not only to just improve economics, but also significantly reduce the amount of tailings, which could have some positive permitting implications. And sustainability is critically important these days, and we believe we had an opportunity to build a very sustainable operation, starting with that hydropower that's available, and about 40 kilometers from the site there's a power line to the site, and complementing that hydropower to look to electrify the mining fleet and really have a strong ESG component to this project. So just to look at the roadmap to production and where we are at that, as I mentioned, we continue to see exploration potential and looking to advance that. On the project development side, looking toward a pre-feasibility study. We haven't announced that yet, but the project and the economics certainly warrant that study. And in our technical report, there's some clear steps that are outlined, things we'd need to do to continue to march down that development path. community engagement side, we've really built a good relationship there from day one. You know, before we had boots on the ground, we started talking to the communities. We had used communities extensively through, you know, and created employment opportunities and opportunities for local businesses. Over the past few years, we've worked there, and that relationship, and together with our stewardship of the environment, really culminated in this exploration agreement that we signed with the basin communities toward the end of Q4 last year. And that's really a commitment to work together and to realize mutual benefits from the project, and in exchange of consent for our activities. And we're really pleased with that agreement. That's going to give us support and consent for all activities up to and including a feasibility study while we go through that. When we get into the more design phases of the project, we'll be working more closely with the communities in terms of formal project development consultation. And ultimately, you know, the exploration agreement really sets a framework for advancing to what they call an RBA, or impact benefit agreement, which would come into force around the time we're in construction, and would outline the benefits in a production scenario. And those types of RBAs are common across Canada and certainly in Saskatchewan on the existing mines. But we've certainly got a good framework and good relationship in place with the communities to gather the necessary support for this operation. And overall, Uranium City is a historical mining town. It's had a precedent for mining. There's a mining community, and certainly all the feedback we've had from the community is that they'd really like to see a new development in that area, and we have a terrific project through Goldfields. And finally, on the permitting side, as many of you are aware, there is a valid permit in place that's for 5,000 ton per day capacity mill and an open pit at the Box deposit that was granted in 2008. Now, our development, as we proposed in the PEA, there are some significant scope changes, and those scope changes are really necessary to bring about the economics we see in the project today. And the most notable of those scope changes is firstly the mining of a Thona that wasn't originally contemplated. The Thona's got a strip ratio of less than 1. It adds some important ounces early in the mine life and improves economics, so that we believe that should be included. So the mining of a Thona, the increase in tailings, we've gone away from a flotation circuit, and also made the tailings more in line with best practices, which has ultimately resulted in a larger tailings footprint. So that is a change in scope, and the final change in scope is going from a 5,000 ton per day processing capacity to a 7,500 ton per day. And that's really, that increase in throughput really brings us closer to the economic sort of sweet spot for the project. So those three changes need to be looked at. What we've done is we have met with government, the government of Saskatchewan, and we're looking to see how we can use the existing permits and what changes might need to be made for that, and if there's any additional environmental assessment required, or it's possible to make these changes under amendments to the existing permit. So we've had an initial meeting, and we'll having additional meetings with a view to making an application in the near term. And of course, we will announce that publicly once that process is formally underway, along with other plans for the Goldfields project. So I did talk quite a bit about Goldfields, but let's turn to uranium, where we did have some assay results come out in the fourth quarter, and we're really excited about those. So just to recap, we are sitting on that northern rim of the Athabasca Basin. We know that's the world's premier district for high-grade uranium, and that setting we have just on that northern rim is not dissimilar to what you find around Arrow, Triple R, and other margin settings, where you have these graphitic rocks, which are the favorable host rocks. The sandstone has been removed, and you're able to target directly into the basement rocks for these high-grade basement-hosted deposits. And those are very favorable targets because they're in these competent rocks that allow for conventional mining. Also, in our case, you're not targeting through lots of sandstone. You're really drilling your targets pretty much from surface once you've gone through a bit of soil and till cover. So a really nice setting to be chasing these, and we have some excellent geology up there. And just zooming in on this slide, we see that basin edge here. We see our 2 uranium projects at Murmac and Strike. And what's really important on this slide are these red lines. Now, those are the historically mapped EM conductors, which reflect primarily graphitic rocks. And that's exactly what you want to chase for these high-grade basin deposits. Now, historically, this area has seen a lot of uranium mining and prospecting, and the mines at Gunnar, Lorado, Beaver Lodge, those are of what they call a Beaver Lodge type, and they're uranium mines of lower grades that sit within these granitic rocks. And historically, the prospecting in this area is really focused on the granites, which often outcrop. So people went and did scintillometer prospecting, often found grades on surface, followed it up with drilling. But there's been really no focus on targeting these EM conductors, the graphitic rocks, the favorable host rocks for the high grade deposits. And those, because they're soft, they're graphite, they sit in the valleys, they wouldn't have been amenable to prospecting. So we have a very nice situation here where there's a huge endowment of uranium in this area, but it hasn't been explored for these higher grade deposits. So at Strike, we did our first pass of drilling there. We developed targets through historical geophysical data as well as some gravity data we did ourselves, and we focused really just in the northern portion of the property, where there's really 3 main primary conductors, the J, K, and L. And we did a first pass across these 3 conductors. They have significant strike length to them, and it was really to test some of our initial target ideas. These EM conductors or graphitic units had never ever been drilled before. There was some historical mining at the 10 occurrence that occurs just off the graphitic conductor, but we drilled 9 holes and we saw graphite, we saw structure. We've now seen from the geochemical results some elevated pathfinders, so the elements that often accompany uranium in these high-grade deposit settings. And at hole number 13, we did have a new discovery of mineralization, up to almost 0.5% uranium. It's narrow, it was over 10 centimeters, but these basement rocks, that can quickly change as you move along strike to get into higher grades and thicker units. So what we're seeing is really these fertile or really prospective units from the initial drilling that we've done. And these are shallow targets. We're not drilling through a lot of sandstone, so easier to test more of them, but certainly more work is warranted at Strike. If we just go to the next slide, this is just hole number 13, and what we drilled, we were really on the edge of a gravity low, where we had that intersection, and it's open along Strike. Obviously significant space still at an early stage here, and that definitely warrants follow-up. Just that intersection shown in core, it's a graphitic unit, it's altered, there's faulting, and the uranium sits around that fault. What we do see further below is also this red hematite showing there's a redox boundary. Everything, all the right ingredients you'd want to see for favorable settings. So definitely more follow-up drilling warranted at Strike, particularly at this location, as well as additional targets that have not been tested during the initial drilling. We move across to Murmac. We drilled also first pass testing. There were 15 holes completed across our 3, what we call corridors. That's at Pitchvane, Armbrust, and Howland. Now those corridors comprise these graphitic packages of graphitic units. And the idea was to really test again. We acquired some VTEM data and had some gravity data. And as a first pass to understand the nature of these conductors and see if we could pick up the right signs for these deposits. Again, the graphitic units don't outcrop, so we want to, and these have never been properly tested, these conductors. So this is an initial pass at testing that, and we saw the graphite, we saw structure alteration, and we did get uranium. In 6 of the 15 holes, we had an anomalous uranium, including up to around 0.2% in hole 2, which is over here on the Armbrust corridor, and in hole 12, which is on the Howland corridor. At the Pitchvane corridor, we also saw some broader zones of mineralization, no high grades yet, but certainly looking positive. We were immediately south of some historical drill holes that had grades of over 1%, but didn't test the same, what we believe is the prospective structure there. So we think there's lots more to do. As a lot of people will tell you in the Athabasca Basin, just because there's some historical drilling, it doesn't necessarily mean too much. And you've got to get into the right fault, the right target zone before you can follow those high grades out along strike. So we definitely see a lot of potential here. What we should also just point out here is that historically, what we can see here in these yellow triangles or dots are some of the historical assays that were the highlight assays that were over 1%. So there's a huge endowment of uranium here, both in outcrop and boulders. And you can see the drill holes, these little black dots on the project. Now, what was typically done historically was they found uranium on surface, either outcrop or sometimes boulders, and would often then chase those target areas and really just drill on the mineralization or on structures. And that was primarily in these granitic rocks. There's been little to no testing really in the graphitic horizons, and that's what we are looking to do. Just to look at some of the mineralization examples from our drilling, our geologists, including myself, we've all worked for uranium companies and been involved with discoveries. We're really excited by what we're seeing here. We're seeing in hole 2, looking at this quartzite that's hematized, and then this nice graphitic units with structured, and lower down, seeing some mineralization in that 0.18% here. In hole 13, this is on the pitch vein corridor, a really nice graphitic palitic unit with this patchy hematization and some mineralization, and just some of the alteration in some of the holes that had some anomalous uranium. These hydrothermal hematites showing these redox boundaries and strong graphite with structure. We are getting in places these white clays, which are often associated with these deposits, and then lots of patchy. We're seeing just lots of hematite coming through here. So really favorable alteration. What we also did in 2022 to accompany some of the drilling and really as follow-up to some of the drilling was get more boots on the ground. Obviously, we had done that through the early part of last year, but we had a concerted program to really follow up on a lot of the historical occurrences and look at some of the structures where we could in the field. Now, obviously, we can't, in the valleys themselves where the graphites are, you don't see anything. It's covered, or there's shallow lakes. But on the valley edges or between valleys, you do get bits of outcrop, as we can see in these photos here. And we really went along those outcrops, looking at structure, doing sampling to try to pick up pathfinder elements. We also visited numerous of these historical uranium occurrences. Again, on the map here, those are shown in yellow. And this map shows in red our highlights from the sampling we conducted. All of those are, apart from one, are outcrop samples, and in most cases, just verifying historical occurrences. And that really, the results we got really supports the fact this area has a huge uranium endowment, and there is a precedent for these higher grades. We saw 2 examples there of a 6.9% on surface, 1.69% also on surface. So we're getting these high grades. What we're also finding is a lot of these high grades on surface occur associated with these cross faults. Now, what was done historically, where these cross faults were found with bits of mineralization, in some cases those were drilled. But what we really believe is a good target is following those cross faults where they intersect the graphitic unit in the valley. And in many cases, that hasn't been tested. So those are really compelling targets. We think these high grades found on surface could be bleed outs from these from a mineralized graphitic unit, and that's really your prime target to go and chase. So we're really encouraged overall by these results, and that we're using them to help vector into areas that will form priority drill targets in the next campaign. Part of the program, we had a really exciting discovery there. We discovered a boulder near Radioactive Spring. Now, this Radioactive Spring was reported historically. We went to go look at it. On surface, there's 15,000 counts per second. It's likely radon in water, but that's coming from somewhere, and it's likely coming from mineralization along that same fault. We're looking at some structural interpretation for that area, but 100 meters from that spring, we found a boulder lying in the field that was sitting beneath some moss. It went off scale on the scintillometer and came back from the lab with 8.8%. Now, the ice direction here is from the northeast, and we know in the northern portion of the property we have these Martin group cover rocks. And because this is a basement boulder, we believe it is sourced from the project area. So obviously this valley going up ice from that boulder is really important. And we see up that valley all these historical occurrences, which we've verified. So we believe this, this corridor is certainly shaping up nicely and warrants some further drill testing. And that just brings us to an end of our webinar. So I thank you very much for listening in. We will make a recording of this available should you want to recap or share it with anyone. And we'll look to update you, everyone, again in April this year from our Q1 activity. Please always reach out if you have any questions. And on that note, I'll just check if there are any in our box. We got, when is the next drill campaign? So we haven't announced any drilling yet. We obviously we've built and are continuing to build drill targets on the uranium side and the gold side. Summer is going to be the best time to drill these projects. We have applied for drill permits, so those we expect will be granted later this month. And then, it will be obviously subject to financing. We are going to be looking to raise some money over the next month or two to fund some drilling. And I think that is the final question. So we'll leave it at that. And thanks and have a great day. Bye.